I stood in the middle of that restaurant, soaking wet champagne bucket still trembling in my hands, staring down at the most dangerous man in the city as freezing water dripped from his dark hair onto his expensive suit. His men had gone completely silent. The entire dining room held its breath. And all I could think was, I just signed my own death warrant. But here's the thing about losing everything. When grief has already torn through your life like a hurricane, when you've buried the love of your life and held your sobbing children through endless nights, when you've sold your wedding rings just to keep the lights on, fear starts to feel like just another bill you can't afford to pay. And sometimes, just sometimes, that makes you the most dangerous person in the room. My name is Lucia Reyes. This is the story of how I went from a terrified widow serving pasta to entitled criminals, to the woman who brought the city's most feared mafia boss to his knees. Not with violence, not with seduction, but with something he'd never encountered before, someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose, and therefore, nothing left to fear. Before I tell you how I got there, how about you? I hope you're doing well, wherever you're watching from. Maybe you're cozy at home, maybe you're on a break from work, maybe the weather outside is warm or cold or somewhere in between. I hope this story gives you something real today, something that reminds you that strength doesn't always look like what we expect. If you're settling in for this journey with me, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, leave a like if you're ready for a story about survival, dignity, and the most unexpected love I never saw coming. But let me start from the beginning. 3 months before I dumped ice water on Antonio Russo's head, I was someone completely different. Or maybe I was always this person, just buried under layers of trying to be small, trying to be safe, trying to keep everyone else comfortable. 3 months before, I was Lucia Reyes, 28 years old, wife to David, mother to Fred and Sophia. I believed in working hard and being kind. I believed that good people got good outcomes if they just kept their heads down and did the right thing. I believed my biggest challenge in life would be getting Fred to eat his vegetables and teaching Sophia her ABCs. I believed my husband would come home from his construction job that Tuesday afternoon. He didn't. The police officer who knocked on my door had kind eyes and a voice that kept apologizing. Scaffolding collapse. Instantaneous. He didn't suffer. As if that was supposed to comfort me. As if knowing David died quickly somehow made the fact that he died at all more bearable. I remember nodding. I remember thanking him. I remember closing the door and standing in our tiny apartment hallway, staring at Fred's backpack hanging on its hook and Sophia's little pink shoes scattered by the entrance and thinking, how do I tell them? How do I explain that Daddy isn't coming home? Not tonight, not ever, and we're completely alone now. The funeral was small. David's parents had passed years before, and mine had cut me off when I married him against their wishes. They thought he wasn't good enough, that I was throwing my life away on a construction worker with no college degree and big dreams that would never materialize. They didn't come to the funeral. They didn't call. They didn't even send flowers. So it was me, Fred, Sophia, a handful of David's co-workers who could barely look at me, and a priest who didn't know my husband but said all the right generic things about a life well lived. Fred held my hand through the entire service. He was 7 years old and already trying to be the man of the house. Sophia, only 5, kept asking when we could go home because she was hungry and her dress was itchy and she didn't understand why everyone was so sad. I tried to explain it in ways her small mind could grasp. Daddy had an accident. Daddy went to heaven. Daddy loves you very much, but can't be with us anymore. She asked if he'd be back for her birthday next month. That's when I locked myself in the bathroom and cried so hard I threw up. The money ran out faster than I thought possible. David's life insurance barely covered the funeral costs. His company offered a small settlement, but their lawyers made it clear that if I pushed for more, I'd be fighting for years and probably lose. I had exactly 2 months of rent saved, a maxed-out credit card, 2 hungry children, and a resume that hadn't been updated in 8 years because I'd been a stay-at-home mom since Fred was born. I applied everywhere. Retail stores, cleaning services, reception desks, anything that would take someone with a massive employment gap and no recent experience. Most places never called back. The ones that did offered minimum wage for overnight shifts, which meant paying for childcare that would eat up most of what I earned. I was 3 days from eviction when I saw the listing. Server needed at Rossetti's. Evening shifts. Tips reported to be excellent. Experience preferred but willing to train the right candidate. Rossetti's. I'd heard of it. Everyone in the city had. It was one of those places where businessmen took clients they wanted to impress, where the wine list had bottles that cost more than my monthly rent, where the dress code was strictly enforced and the atmosphere was quietly elegant. It was also, according to whispered rumors, a place where certain customers conducted certain business that had nothing to do with the menu. I didn't care. I needed the job. The interview was conducted by Mr. Rossetti himself, a man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every nervous gesture I made. He asked about my experience. I told him the truth. I'd waitressed briefly in college, but that was a decade ago at a diner. Nothing like his establishment. He asked why I needed the job. I told him the truth about that too. I was a widow with 2 children and no safety net, and I would work harder than anyone he'd ever hired because I had to. He studied me for a long moment, then said, "Evenings only. Tuesday through Saturday. 5 to midnight. You'll shadow Teresa for 2 weeks, then you're on your own. The customers here expect perfection. Many of them are very particular, very demanding. Some of them you'll recognize from the news or the papers. You don't ask questions. You don't gossip about what you see or hear. You smile, you serve, you collect your tips, and you go home." Understood. I understood. I understood that he was warning me. I understood that particular customers meant dangerous people. I understood that I was trading one kind of danger for another, that keeping my apartment might mean walking into situations I wasn't prepared for. But Fred needed new shoes. Sophia needed her asthma medication. The electricity bill was overdue. I said yes. My first night, Teresa, a woman in her 40s who'd been at Rossetti's for 15 years, gave me the real orientation. She showed me which tables were for regulars, which customers tipped well and which didn't, how to navigate the kitchen during rush hours, and most importantly, who to avoid. "Table 7, she said, pointing to a corner booth with a perfect view of the entire restaurant. "Every Thursday night. You never, ever serve that table unless Mr. Rossetti specifically assigns you. Even then, you keep your eyes down, you don't speak unless spoken to, and you definitely don't ask questions." "Who sits there?" I asked. Teresa's expression went flat. "People you don't want to know. Trust me, Lucia. I've seen 3 servers get fired for tiny mistakes at that table. One girl brought the wrong wine vintage. Gone. A guy laughed at something he overheard. Gone. Last year, a new waiter made eye contact too long with the man who sits at the head of that table, and I swear to God, that kid left in tears and never came back. What did the man do? Nothing. That's what made it terrifying. He just looked at the kid, really looked at him, and the kid understood immediately that he'd crossed a line. That's what you need to understand about the people who sit at table 7. They don't need to threaten. They don't need to yell. Their presence is the threat." I looked at the empty booth, trying to imagine what kind of person could inspire that level of fear. I found out on my 3rd week. Thursday night. The restaurant was busy, every table full, kitchen working at capacity. I'd been doing well, getting comfortable with the rhythm, learning the menu, building rapport with the regular customers. My tips were good, better than I'd hoped. I'd paid my overdue rent. I'd bought Fred those shoes. I was starting to believe maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. Then Mr. Rossetti approached me during a brief lull, his expression unreadable. "Table 7 tonight, Lucia." My stomach dropped. Teresa said. "Teresa is handling a private party in the back room. You're my most reliable server on the floor right now. You'll be fine. Just remember what you've been taught. Professional. Efficient. Invisible." Invisible. Right. I could do invisible. I'd been invisible most of my life. At 8:30, they arrived. 5 men, all dressed in suits that probably cost more than my car used to be worth before I sold it. They moved through the restaurant with the kind of confidence that comes from never being challenged, never being questioned, never being told no. And at the center of them was him. Antonio Russo. I didn't know his name then. I just knew that every single person in that restaurant, from the hostess to the other diners to the kitchen staff, went completely still when he walked in. I knew that Mr. Rossetti himself came out to greet him, shaking his hand with genuine warmth, but also unmistakable deference. I knew that the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, or maybe that was just my imagination responding to the sudden spike in my heart rate. He was younger than I expected. Mid-30s maybe, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of physical ease that suggested violence was always an option but rarely necessary. His suit was perfectly tailored, dark and expensive. His hair was dark too, a little longer than fashionable, falling naturally away from his face in a way that should have looked messy, but instead looked deliberate. And his eyes, when they swept the room before settling at table 7, were the darkest brown I'd ever seen, almost black, assessing everything in seconds. Tattoos peeked out from his collar and cuffs. His hands, as he unbuttoned his suit jacket and sat down, were scarred across the knuckles. This was a man who'd built his reputation with those hands. Teresa's warning echoed in my head. Eyes down. Don't speak unless spoken to. Be invisible. I approached the table with the wine list and menus, my hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. I'd survived worse than intimidating customers.
Ide surviva geriaf. Ide surviva puberty.
I could survive one dinner service. Good evening, gentlemen, I said, keeping my voice professional and neutral. Can I start you with something to drink? The other men ordered quickly. Whiskey, mostly. Expensive bottles I had to double-check the pronunciation on. Then Antonio Russo looked up at me. Really looked at me. And I made my first mistake. I looked back. Not in challenge. Not in flirtation. Just in basic human acknowledgement. The way you look at someone when they're speaking to you, when you're trying to hear their order, when you're doing your job. But his eyes narrowed slightly, like I'd done something unexpected. Something wrong. Champagne, he said. His voice was exactly what I expected.
Deep.
Controlled. The kind of voice that didn't need to rise to command attention. The Cristal. 2 bottles. I wrote it down. Right away, sir. I turned to go. Wait. I froze. Turn back. Yes, sir? He leaned back in his seat, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Curiosity, maybe. Or suspicion. You're new. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. 3 weeks, sir. What's your name? Every instinct screamed at me that giving my name was dangerous somehow, but refusing would be worse. Lucia, sir. Lucia. He said it slowly, like he was tasting the syllables. Then he smiled, and it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're not afraid of me, Lucia? The honest answer was yes, I was terrified. But something in the way he asked it, something in the slight mockery in his tone, something about the way his men chuckled like this was entertainment, made a spark of anger flare beneath the fear. I'd spent 3 months being afraid. Afraid of losing my home. Afraid of failing my children. Afraid of every bill, every phone call, every knock at the door. I was so tired of being afraid. I'm here to do my job, sir, I said evenly. I'll get your champagne. This time when I turned away, he let me go. But I felt his eyes on me the entire walk back to the bar. The rest of the service should have been routine. Bring drinks. Take orders. Deliver food. Stay professional. Stay invisible. Except Antonio Russo didn't want me to be invisible. Every time I approached the table, he found something to comment on. My accent, where I was from, how long I'd lived in the city, whether I liked working at Rossetti's, if the tips were good. Each question felt like a test I didn't know the answers to. His men watched these exchanges with growing amusement. They could sense what I could sense, that their boss was playing with me the way a cat plays with something small and helpless. I answered politely, briefly, trying to give him nothing to latch onto. But then, after the main course, after I'd cleared the plates and brought dessert menus, he crossed a line. I was leaning slightly to place a menu in front of one of his men when I felt Antonio Russo's hand on my lower back. Not a brush. Not an accident. A deliberate touch, his palm flat against me, fingers spreading possessively. I went completely rigid. You know, he said casually, his hand not moving, you should smile more, Lucia. You're too serious. It's not attractive. His men laughed. The sound made my skin crawl. I stepped away from his touch, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Will there be anything else, sir? Yes. His smile widened. Smile for me. Show me you're grateful for the tips I'm going to leave you. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to smile, to laugh it off, to swallow my dignity and keep this job because I needed it, because my children needed it, because pride didn't pay rent. But I thought about Fred, trying so hard to be brave. I thought about Sophia, asking when Daddy would come home. I thought about David, who'd loved me for my strength, who'd always told me never to let anyone make me feel small. And I thought about every single time in my life I'd made myself smaller, quieter, less, just to keep the peace. Just to avoid conflict. Just to make other people comfortable with my presence. I was so tired of being small. No, I said quietly. The laughter stopped. The entire table went silent. Antonio Russo's expression changed. The amusement drained out of it, replaced by something cold and sharp. He stood up slowly, and suddenly I realized just how much bigger than me he was, how easily he could hurt me if he wanted to. He stepped closer. Too close. Invading my space deliberately. What did you just say to me? My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands were shaking. But my voice, when it came out, was steady. I said no, sir. I'm not going to smile on command like a trained dog. I'm here to serve your food and drinks. That's all. The restaurant had gone quiet. Other diners were watching now, pretending not to, but absolutely riveted. Mr. Rossetti was emerging from the kitchen, his face pale. Antonio Russo stared down at me, and I could see the exact moment he decided to escalate. To punish me for my defiance. To make an example out of me. He reached out and grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to really hurt, but firm enough that I couldn't pull away without making a scene. His grip was hot against my skin. Maybe you don't understand how things work here, he said softly, dangerously. Maybe someone needs to teach you about respect. And that's when something inside me broke. Or maybe it didn't break. Maybe it had been building for 3 months. All that grief and rage and exhaustion and desperation compressed into a tight knot in my chest, just waiting for the right moment to explode. I yanked my wrist free, grabbed the champagne bucket from the table, the one with his expensive Cristal on ice. And before I could think about consequences, before fear could override fury, I lifted it and poured the entire contents, ice water and melting cubes and all, directly over Antonio Russo's head. The shock on his face would have been funny if I wasn't so angry. Water streamed down his perfect hair, soaked his expensive suit, dripped onto his leather shoes. Ice cubes bounced off his shoulders and scattered across the floor. His men jumped to their feet, hands going inside their jackets, reaching for God knows what. But I didn't care. I was past caring. I understand respect perfectly, I said, my voice shaking but loud enough for everyone to hear. And you don't get it by groping your waitress and treating people like they're less than human just because you have money and power. Here's your champagne, sir. Enjoy. I set the empty bucket down on the table with a sharp crack. And then reality crashed back in. Mr. Rossetti was running toward us. Other staff members were frozen in horror. The entire restaurant was dead silent, everyone staring at the soaking wet Mafia boss and the waitress who'd just committed what might be the last act of her very short life. Antonio Russo stood there, water dripping from his hair, ice cubes at his feet, and just looked at me. His expression was completely unreadable now. Not angry, not amused, just absolutely still, like a predator deciding whether something is prey or a threat. Then Mr. Rossetti was there, grabbing my arm, pulling me backward, his voice high with panic. I am so sorry, Mr. Russo. She's new. She doesn't understand. Please forgive this terrible. Get her out of my sight, Antonio Russo said quietly.
Now.
Mr. Rossetti dragged me toward the back, through the kitchen where every staff member stared at me like I was already dead, into the small office where he closed the door and turned on me with fury and fear in equal measure. What have you done? Do you have any idea who that is? Do you know what he could do to this restaurant?
To you?
To your family? My family. The mention of Fred and Sophia cut through the adrenaline fog. He touched me, I said, my voice hollow now. He put his hands on me and told me to smile, and I couldn't. You couldn't. Mr. Rossetti laughed, a bitter, desperate sound. You couldn't. Lucia, that man owns half the city. He could have this place shut down by tomorrow. He could ruin me. He could ruin you. And you couldn't just smile and get through one dinner service?
No, y whisperat.
I couldn't. He paced the small office, running his hands through his hair. Then he stopped and looked at me, and I could see him making a decision I wasn't going to like. You're going back out there. You're going to apologize. You're going to beg for his forgiveness. And maybe if you're convincing enough, he'll let this go. I'd known it was coming, but hearing it out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. And if I don't, then you're fired. And I'll make sure every restaurant in this city knows you assaulted a customer. You'll never work in this industry again. Assaulted. That's what we were calling it. Not self-defense. Not standing up to harassment. Assault. I thought about my apartment. About the rent that would be due again next week. About Fred's school fees and Sophia's medication and the electricity bill and the dozens of other expenses that never stopped coming. I thought about swallowing my pride, going back out there, kneeling if I had to, begging forgiveness from a man who thought he could touch me whenever he wanted. I thought about what kind of example that would set for my children. Would I be teaching Fred about how to treat women? Would I be teaching Sophia about how much her dignity was worth? And I thought about David, who'd loved me for being strong, who'd always said I had more courage than I gave myself credit for. My voice cracked, but it didn't break. I've lost everything already. I've buried my husband. I've sold everything I owned. I've begged for help from people who wouldn't even look at me. If you want to fire me, fire me. But I'm not going to apologize for not letting someone treat me like property. Mr. Rossetti stared at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Like I was insane for throwing away this job. Maybe I was insane. Maybe grief had broken something fundamental in me. Or maybe it had finally shown me what I was actually made of. Get out, he said flatly. Clean out your locker. You're done. I nodded, turned toward the door. My hands were shaking again now, but not from fear. From the realization of what I'd just done. What it would cost. I'd stood up for myself, and it was going to destroy us. But as I reached for the door handle, Mr. Rossetti's phone rang. He glanced at it, and his face went white. It's him, he whispered. It's Russo. He answered, his hand trembling slightly. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Of course, sir. He hung up and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Fear, definitely. But something else too.
Confusion.
He wants to see you. Alone. In the private dining room. My blood went cold. Why? I don't know. But when Antonio Russo asks for something, you don't ask why. You just do it. This was it then. The consequences I'd been expecting. Maybe he wanted to deliver them personally. Maybe his men were already waiting in that private room to teach me what happened to people who humiliated him. Maybe I should run. Grab my things and run, and never look back. But where would I run to? I had nowhere to go. No one to protect me. And if Antonio Russo wanted to find me, he would. So I lifted my chin, straightened my shoulders, and said, Where's the private dining room? Mr. Rossetti gave me directions like he was sending me to my execution. Maybe he was. I walked through the kitchen, past the staring staff, down a hallway I'd never been in before, to a door at the very end. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel every breath. I knocked. Come in, said that deep, controlled voice. I opened the door. Antonio Russo sat alone at a small table, his suit jacket off, his wet shirt clinging to him, a towel around his shoulders. His hair was still damp, pushed back from his face. The ice water had been cleaned up, but the evidence of what I'd done was all over him. He looked up as I entered, and for a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then he did something I absolutely did not expect. He smiled. A real smile this time, not the cold mockery from before. Something genuine. Something that made him look younger, less dangerous, almost human. Close the door, Lucia, he said. We need to talk. I stood in that doorway for 3 full seconds, my hand still on the door handle, my entire body screaming at me to run. Every survival instinct I'd developed over the past 3 months told me that closing myself in a room alone with Antonio Russo was a mistake I wouldn't walk away from. But I'd already made my choice when I poured that ice water over his head. Running now wouldn't change anything. I stepped inside and closed the door. The click of the latch sounded impossibly loud in the quiet room. Antonio Russo gestured to the chair across from him, that strange smile still playing at the corners of his mouth.
Seat.
It wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't a request either. I sat, keeping my spine straight, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. Up close, without the buffer of his men and the noise of the restaurant, he was even more intimidating. The tattoos I'd glimpsed earlier extended up his neck, intricate designs that disappeared under his collar. The scar on his knuckles was joined by another across his jawline, faint but visible. This was a man who'd survived things that would have killed softer people. "You know," he said conversationally, reaching for a glass of water on the table, "in the 15 years I've been coming to this restaurant, no one has ever dared to even raise their voice at me. Not the staff. Not other customers. Certainly not a waitress on her 3rd week of work." I didn't respond. What could I say? I wasn't sure if he was leading up to a threat or just making conversation before whatever came next. He took a sip of water, his dark eyes never leaving mine. "Everyone in the city knows who I am. What I do. What happens to people who disrespect me. And yet you, a woman who by all accounts desperately needs this job, looked me in the eye and said no." "I did," I said quietly. "Why?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected anger, threats, maybe even violence. I hadn't expected genuine curiosity. "Because you were wrong," I said simply. "You don't get to touch people without permission just because you're powerful. You don't get to demand that someone degrade themselves for your entertainment. And I won't teach my children that dignity is something you sell for tips, no matter how good they are." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition of something he hadn't expected to find. "Your children," he repeated. "How old?" I hesitated, wondering if giving him information about Fred and Sophia was dangerous. But he could find out anything he wanted about me with a single phone call. Hiding basic facts seemed pointless. 7 and 5. A boy and a girl. And their father?
Dead.
3 months ago. I said it flatly, without emotion, because if I let any feeling into those words I'd start crying, and I refused to cry in front of this man. Antonio Russo nodded slowly, like something was clicking into place. "That's why you're here. Working evenings at a place like Rossetti's, when you're clearly terrified of half the customers. You need the money." "Needed," I corrected. Past tense. "I'm fired, remember?" "Are you?" I blinked. "Mr. Rossetti said. Mr. Rossetti does what I tell him to do. If I wanted you fired, you'd be fired. If I wanted you to keep your job, you'd keep it." He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his gaze intense. "The question is, what do I want?" My heart was racing again. This felt like a trap, but I couldn't see the shape of it yet. "I don't know," I admitted. "Neither do I," he said, and he sounded genuinely puzzled by that. "I should want you gone. I should want you punished for what you did out there. My reputation exists because people know that disrespecting me has consequences. If I let you humiliate me in public and walk away without any repercussions, it makes me look weak." "So punish me," I said, lifting my chin. "Do whatever you're going to do. But I won't apologize for defending myself." He studied me for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with something internal, some calculation I wasn't privy to. Then he stood up, and I tensed, ready for whatever came next. But he just walked to the window, looking out at the city lights, his back to me. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost thoughtful. "My mother was a waitress. Did you know that?" I hadn't known. I didn't know anything about Antonio Russo, except his reputation. She worked at a place not much different from this. Long hours, terrible pay, customers who thought they owned her because they left a $20 tip. My father was one of those customers. Married, powerful, used to getting what he wanted. He wanted her.
She said no.
He kept pushing. She kept refusing.
He paused.
Until one day, she couldn't refuse anymore because she needed the job too badly, and he knew it. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, understanding where the story was going. I'm the result of that, he continued, still not looking at me. She raised me alone, working herself to death at that restaurant, taking abuse from men like my father every single night because the alternative was me going hungry. She died when I was 16. Heart attack. The doctors said it was stress and exhaustion. I say it was because she spent her whole life swallowing her pride and her rage to survive, and eventually it killed her. He turned back to face me then, and something in his expression was different.
Raw.
Almost vulnerable. When you said no to me tonight, when you refused to smile and perform and make yourself small, I saw her. The woman she could have been if she'd had the courage to fight back. And when you dumped that ice water on my head, I realized something. What? I whispered. That I've become exactly the kind of man I swore I'd destroy. The silence that followed was heavy with implications I didn't know how to process. This wasn't what I'd expected.
None of this was.
I'm not going to apologize for what I did, I said again, because I needed him to understand that. Even knowing your story, even understanding why it affected you, you were still wrong. I know I was. He moved back to the table, but didn't sit. That's why I'm not going to punish you. That's why you're keeping your job, if you want it. And that's why I'm going to leave you a $5,000 tip for your trouble tonight. I jerked back like he'd slapped me.
No.
His eyebrows rose.
No.
I don't want your guilt money. I don't want you trying to buy your way out of feeling bad about how you treated me. Keep your $5,000. I'll find another job. There is no other job, he said bluntly. Not in this city. Not for someone with your resume and your responsibilities. You need this position and we both know it. He was right, and I hated him for being right. So what then? I asked bitterly. I stay, and every Thursday I serve you, and we both pretend tonight didn't happen? You go back to being the terrifying Mafia boss, and I go back to being the invisible waitress who knows her place. No, he said. You stay, and you never serve my table again. Teresa can handle Thursdays. You work the rest of the restaurant, make your tips, take care of your children, and I leave you alone. That's the deal. It should have been perfect.
It was exactly what I needed.
A job, safety, distance from this dangerous man. But something about the way he said it, something about the resignation in his voice, made me pause. Why do you care? I asked. Why does it matter to you at all what happens to me? He smiled again, but this time it was sad. Because my mother didn't have anyone who cared. Because she died believing she deserved the treatment she got, that she'd earned her misery by being weak. Because someone should have stood up for her and no one ever did. He picked up his suit jacket, preparing to leave. Consider this me standing up for her. 30 years too late. He walked to the door, and I should have let him go. I should have taken the gift I was being offered and counted myself lucky. But I thought about his mother, working herself to death in a restaurant like this one. I thought about how that trauma had shaped him, turned him into someone who hurt people the way he'd been hurt. And I thought about Fred and Sophia and what kind of people they'd become if I let grief and fear shape them the same way. Mr. Russo, I called out. He stopped, his hand on the door handle, and looked back at me. Your mother would be proud, I said, of who you could be. Not who you've been, but who you could choose to be from this moment forward. For just a second, something vulnerable and young flashed across his face. Then the mask came back down, the dangerous man taking over again. Get back to work, Lucia. And stay away from table 7.
He left.
I sat in that private dining room for 5 more minutes, trying to process what had just happened. I'd humiliated a mafia boss, gotten fired, gotten unfired, learned his tragic origin story, and somehow walked away completely unscathed. It felt like I'd stepped through a door into an alternate reality where the rules I understood no longer applied. When I finally emerged, Mr. Rossetti was waiting in the hallway, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. What happened? Are you all right? Did he hurt you? I'm fine, I said, still feeling dazed.
He wants me to keep my job.
But I'm never serving table 7 again. Mr. Rossetti's relief was palpable. Thank God. Thank God. Lucia, you understand how lucky you are, don't you? What could have happened tonight? I understood. But I also understood that luck had nothing to do with it. The rest of that night passed in a blur. I finished my shift, collected my tips, and took the bus home to the small apartment where my neighbor Mrs. Bryan was watching Fred and Sophia. Mrs. Bryan was in her 70s, a widow herself, and had taken pity on me after David died. She watched my children for far less than any babysitter would charge, and sometimes she wouldn't accept payment at all, claiming they were company for her. I knew I was taking advantage of her kindness, but I had no other options. They were good tonight, she told me as I paid her. Fred did his homework. Sophia drew you a picture. It's on the refrigerator. I thanked her, locked the door behind her, and walked into the tiny bedroom where both my children were sleeping. Fred in his small bed by the window, Sophia in her toddler bed against the opposite wall. We couldn't afford separate rooms. We could barely afford this place. I sat on the floor between their beds, watching them sleep, and finally let myself feel everything I'd been holding back all night. The fear, the anger, the strange, confusing interaction with Antonio Russo. The knowledge that I'd gambled our security on my pride and somehow, impossibly, won. But also the understanding that nothing had really changed. I was still alone, still desperate, still one catastrophe away from losing everything. Sophia stirred in her sleep, reaching out for me. I took her small hand, feeling how fragile it was, how much she trusted me to protect her. I'm trying, I whispered. I'm trying so hard. Fred's eyes opened, groggy and concerned.
Mama?
You okay? I wiped my face quickly, forcing a smile. I'm fine, baby. Go back to sleep. You're crying. Happy tears, I lied. I had a good night at work. Made good tips. He studied me with eyes too old for 7, eyes that had seen too much in 3 months. Mama, are we going to be okay? The question broke my heart, because he shouldn't have to worry about that. He should be thinking about toys and friends and school, not whether we'd have enough money to survive. Yes, I told him, praying it was true. We're going to be okay. I promise. He nodded, trusting me completely, and closed his eyes again. I stayed there between their beds until sunrise, watching them sleep, making plans, trying to figure out how to build a future out of the wreckage of our past. The next night at work, Teresa pulled me aside before service started. Everyone's talking about what you did, she said, her voice low. Half the staff thinks you're insane. The other half thinks you're a hero. But Lucia, you need to understand something. Men like Antonio Russo, don't forget. He might have let you off easy last night, but he'll remember. And if you ever cross him again, if you ever make him look weak in front of his people again, there won't be a second chance. I know, I said.
Do you?
Because you don't look scared enough. The truth was I was scared. But I'd learned something about myself in that private dining room. Fear didn't control me the way it used to. Grief had burned through me so completely that normal fears felt manageable in comparison. What could Antonio Russo do to me that life hadn't already done? The evening went smoothly. I served my tables, made my tips, avoided table 7 entirely. Antonio Russo came in with his men at his usual time, took his usual spot, and Teresa handled them with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew exactly how to be invisible. I didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge his presence, kept my head down, and did my job exactly as Mr. Rossetti wanted. But I felt his eyes on me several times throughout the night, watching, assessing, trying to figure me out the same way I was trying to figure him out. This continued for 2 weeks. Every Thursday he came in. Every Thursday I avoided him. We existed in the same space without interacting, like 2 planets in separate orbits that occasionally aligned but never touched. Until the night everything changed again. It was a Tuesday, not his usual day. I was serving a table of businessmen when I heard a commotion near the entrance. Raised voices, someone arguing with the hostess. I glanced over and saw a woman, maybe in her early 40s, trying to force her way past the hostess stand. I know he's here, she was saying, her voice slurred with alcohol. I saw his car outside. Tell him Nancy wants to talk to him. Mr. Rossetti appeared, trying to calm her down, but she was having none of it. You think I don't know what goes on here? You think I don't know this is where he meets his whores? That's when I saw Antonio Russo emerge from the back hallway, his expression thunderous. The woman Nancy saw him too. Her face crumpled, all the anger draining out and leaving only desperate sadness. Antonio, please.
Just talk to me.
It's been 6 months. You won't answer my calls. You won't see me. I just want to understand what I did wrong. He walked up to her, and I expected him to be cruel. Expected him to throw her out, humiliate her, show her the same cold indifference he showed everyone else. But instead, his voice was gentle when he spoke. Nancy, you didn't do anything wrong.
We've talked about this.
It's over. You need to move on. I can't, she sobbed. I love you. We had plans. We were going to. We were never going to, he said firmly, but not unkindly. You wanted things I can't give. A normal life. Marriage. Children. That's not who I am. You could change. For me, you could. No, I couldn't. And you deserve someone who can give you what you want. That person isn't me. She reached for him, and he stepped back smoothly, maintaining distance. Fred, he called to one of his men, who'd been watching from table 7. Call Nancy a car. Make sure she gets home safely. I don't want to go home, Nancy cried. I want to stay with you. You're drunk, you're upset, and you're embarrassing yourself, Antonio said, and now there was an edge to his voice. Go home. Sober up. And don't come here again. This is my place. You're not welcome anymore. The words were harsh, but I could see the discomfort in his posture. He didn't enjoy this. He just wanted her gone. Fred, the bodyguard, gently took Nancy's arm and guided her toward the door. She went, sobbing, casting desperate looks back at Antonio Russo, who stood rigid until she was completely out of sight. Then he turned and walked back toward the private rooms without looking at anyone. The restaurant slowly returned to normal. Other diners went back to their meals. Staff went back to work. But I couldn't shake the image of that woman's broken expression, her desperate love for a man who clearly couldn't love her back. Later that night, after most customers had left and I was helping close down my section, I found Antonio Russo sitting alone at the bar, a glass of whiskey in front of him, his expression distant. I should have left him alone. Should have remembered Teresa's warnings and my own promise to keep my distance. But I thought about what he'd said about his mother, about how trauma had shaped him. And I thought about that woman Nancy, who'd loved him and been devastated when he couldn't return it. I sat down on the bar stool next to him. He looked over, surprised. I thought you were avoiding me. I was. I am. I gestured to his drink. Rough night. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You could say that. She really loved you. I know. He took a drink. That's the problem. I told her from the start I couldn't give her what she wanted. I was clear about my limitations. But she thought she could change me. Thought love would be enough. Why can't you give her what she wants? He turned to look at me fully then, and his eyes were full of something raw and honest. Because I'm not capable of it. I'm too damaged.
Too violent.
Too broken by what I do and who I am. Nancy wanted a husband who'd come home for dinner and play with their kids and grow old peacefully. I can't be that man. I'll never be that man. You don't know that. Yes, I do. You've seen a glimpse of who I am, Lucia. The cruelty, the control, the capacity for violence. That's not something that goes away because someone loves you. That's who I am at my core. I thought about David, who'd been gentle and kind and everything good. I thought about how his death had revealed strengths in me I didn't know I had, but also darkness, anger, capacity for violence that had emerged when Antonio Russo touched me. People aren't fixed things, I said quietly. We're all capable of both good and terrible things. The question is which parts of ourselves we choose to feed, which parts we let grow. He stared at me, and something in his expression shifted. You're a very strange woman, Lucia Reyes. Because I don't think you're beyond redemption? Because you see me humiliate someone in public, hear me admit I'm incapable of love, watch me break a woman's heart, and still sit down next to me like I'm worth talking to. I stood up, preparing to go back to work. Maybe I'm just naive. Or maybe I recognize someone who's trying to protect themselves from more pain by pretending they can't feel anything at all.
Grief does that.
Makes you numb, because feeling too much would destroy you. But eventually you have to choose to feel again, even if it hurts. I walked away before he could respond, but I felt his eyes following me across the restaurant. That night, when I got home, there was an envelope taped to my apartment door. Inside was $5,000 in cash and a note in neat handwriting. Not guilt money. Gratitude for reminding me I used to be human. Use it for your children. I sat on my couch, that money spread across my lap, and cried for the first time since David's funeral. Not sad tears. Not happy tears. Just release, the kind that comes when something impossible happens and you realize the universe is more complicated than you thought. I used the money to pay off my credit card debt, buy Fred and Sophia new clothes, and put some in savings for emergencies. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that Antonio Russo had cleared his conscience and we'd go back to ignoring each other. I was wrong. Over the next month, Antonio Russo became a regular problem I didn't know how to solve. He started coming to the restaurant on random nights, not just Thursdays. Tuesday, Saturday, Monday evening. Always alone or with just one or two of his men, never the full entourage. And always, somehow, ending up at a table in my section. Mr. Rossetti noticed, but said nothing. The other servers noticed and whispered about it. Teresa pulled me aside 3 separate times to ask what was going on, and I honestly couldn't tell her because I didn't know. He never touched me again. Never said anything inappropriate. He'd order his food, eat quietly, leave generous tips, and go. But he'd watch me work, and sometimes when I brought him his check, he'd ask me simple questions. How were my children? Was Sophia's asthma under control? Did Fred like school? Questions that showed he remembered details from our conversations. Questions that felt invasive and caring at the same time. I answered politely but briefly, maintaining professional distance, trying to figure out what game he was playing. Then one night in late October, Sophia got sick. Not regular sick. Terrifying sick. She woke up at 2 in the morning gasping for air, her inhaler doing nothing, her lips turning blue. I called 911, held her while we waited for the ambulance, begging her to breathe, promising her everything would be okay, while panic ripped through my chest. Fred stood in the doorway in his pajamas, crying silently, too scared to make noise. The hospital kept her for 3 days. Severe asthma attack triggered by a respiratory infection. They pumped her full of steroids and antibiotics and kept her on oxygen while I sat by her bed and tried not to fall apart. The bills started arriving before she was even discharged. Emergency room visit. Ambulance transport. 3 nights in pediatric intensive care. Medications. Specialist consultations. My insurance covered some of it. But my deductible was high, and the copays alone were more than I made in 2 weeks. I missed 3 shifts at the restaurant. Mr. Rossetti was understanding, but made it clear I couldn't afford to miss many more. The other servers had to cover my sections. The restaurant didn't pay sick leave. When Sophia was finally stable enough to come home, I borrowed money from Mrs. Bryan to pay the first hospital bill. She gave it to me reluctantly, clearly not able to afford it herself, but unable to say no when I broke down crying in her doorway. I went back to work exhausted, terrified, and so deep in debt, I couldn't see a way out. That's when Antonio Russo made his move. It was a Thursday night, 2 weeks after Sophia's hospitalization. He came in alone, sat at a corner table, and specifically asked for me to serve him. Mr. Rossetti assigned me despite the standing arrangement, giving me a meaningful look that suggested I shouldn't argue. I approached his table, with dread sitting heavy in my stomach. "Good evening, Mr. Russo. What can I get for you tonight?" He looked up from his phone, and his expression was serious. "Sit down, Lucia. I'm working. I've already cleared it with Rossetti."
Seat.
I sat, wondering what fresh disaster was about to unfold. "I heard about your daughter," he said without preamble. "Is she all right?" My throat tightened. She's better.
Home now.
How did you? I pay attention. You missed work, and when I asked why, someone mentioned your daughter was in the hospital. He paused. How much are the medical bills? I stiffened immediately. That's none of your business. How much, Lucia? Why do you care? Just answer the question. I wanted to tell him to mind his own business. I wanted to maintain my pride and independence and not accept anything more from this dangerous man who'd already given me too much. But I was drowning. Sophia needed follow-up appointments with a pulmonary specialist. New medications that insurance wouldn't fully cover. Fred needed new shoes again because kids grew impossibly fast.
Rent was due in a week.
Mrs. Bryan needed to be paid back. The credit card I'd managed to pay off was maxed out again with hospital copays. $12,000, I whispered. After insurance. And that's just the hospital. The specialist visits and medications will add another few thousand over the next 6 months. Antonio Russo didn't flinch at the number. He pulled out his phone, typed something, and set it down. It's handled. I blinked. What? The bills. I've paid them. All of them. The hospital balance, the specialist, the medications for the next year. It's done. The room tilted slightly. You can't just. I already did. My assistant called the hospital 20 minutes ago and paid your account in full. She's setting up a credit account with the pharmacy for Sophia's medications. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. Several nearby diners looked over. I didn't care.
No.
Absolutely not. I can't accept that. He remained perfectly calm, which somehow made me angrier. Why not? Because I don't take charity. Because I don't want to owe you anything. Because every time you give me money, it makes me feel like I'm something you've purchased. That hit him. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the flash of hurt in his eyes. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Why do you keep doing this? Why do you care about me and my children? He stood up slowly, stepping closer, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Because when I look at you, I see my mother, working herself to death, too proud to ask for help, drowning in medical bills and debt and fear. And I see what could have happened if someone had cared enough to help her. If someone had seen her struggling and decided she mattered. I'm not your mother. You don't get to fix your past by throwing money at me. Maybe not. But your daughter needed medical care, and you can't afford it, and I can. What kind of person would I be if I let a child suffer when I could prevent it? The argument was sound, logical, reasonable, and I hated it because it left me with no good response. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice breaking. There has to be something. People like you don't just give away $15,000 out of kindness. What's the price? What am I going to owe you? Something painful crossed his face.
Nothing.
You owe me nothing. I want nothing from you except for you to stop drowning. To have one less thing to worry about. To keep your daughter healthy. I don't believe you. I know. And that tells me how many times people have hurt you, how many times kindness came with conditions. He picked up his coat. Keep the money. Use it for Sophia. I'm not going to take it back, and I'm not going to demand anything in return. Sometimes, Lucia, people just help because they can. He left before I could respond, leaving me standing in the middle of the restaurant, shaking with anger and confusion, and something else I didn't want to name. That night, I confirmed with the hospital that my balance was indeed zero. The pharmacy confirmed the account for Sophia's medications. It was all real. He'd actually done it. I sat on my couch after the kids went to bed and tried to process what this meant. I'd spent 3 months fighting to maintain my independence, to prove I could survive on my own, to show my children that we didn't need anyone else. And in one gesture, Antonio Russo had shattered that illusion, had shown me that I couldn't actually do this alone, that I was failing, and without his intervention, I would have kept failing until something terrible happened. The pride I'd clung to felt suddenly hollow. What good was pride if Sophia couldn't breathe? What did independence matter if I couldn't afford the medicine that kept my daughter alive? I cried again, angry tears this time, mourning the loss of the woman I thought I was.
Strong.
self-sufficient, capable. The truth was I'd been barely surviving, held together by desperation and stubbornness. And Antonio Russo had seen through all of it. The next night, I went to the restaurant with a purpose. I asked Mr. Rossetti which night Antonio typically came in for dinner, then requested that shift. When he arrived, I was waiting at his usual table. "I need to talk to you," I said before he could sit down. He glanced at his two men, who took the hint and moved to a different table. All right. We sat. I'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, but now that I was here, the words felt inadequate. "Thank you," I finally said. "For Sophia's medical bills. For the medications. For caring when you didn't have to." "You're welcome. But I need you to understand something. I can't keep accepting your money. It makes me feel powerless. Like I'm not taking care of my children on my own, like I'm failing as a mother." "You're not failing." "I am, though. Because if you hadn't stepped in, Sophia wouldn't have the care she needs. I couldn't provide it. I was going to have to choose between rent and her medications, between electricity and specialist visits. What kind of mother can't afford to keep her child healthy?" My voice cracked on the last word, and Antonio reached across the table like he wanted to take my hand, then stopped himself. "The kind of mother who's been dealt an impossible situation," he said quietly. "Your husband died. You were left with 2 children and no support system. You're working as hard as you can, and it's still not enough because the system is designed to keep people like you struggling. That's not failure. That's just reality. Reality that you can fix with money."
Yes. So let me. Why?
I demanded. "I need to understand why this matters to you. Why I matter to you." He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with whether to be honest or deflect. Finally, he said, "Do you believe in redemption?" The question surprised me. "I don't know. Maybe. I've done terrible things, Lucia. Things that keep me awake at night. I've hurt people, destroyed lives, built an empire on fear and violence. I tell myself it's business, that it's necessary, that everyone I've hurt deserved it. But the truth is I'm exactly what you think I am. A bad man who does bad things." "Then why?" "Because every time I see you fighting to take care of your children, working yourself to exhaustion, refusing to compromise your dignity, even when it costs you everything, I see a chance to do something good. One good thing in a lifetime of terrible things. Maybe it doesn't balance the scales. Maybe I'm still damned. But at least I helped someone who deserved it. At least I made sure your children have what they need." I stared at him, seeing the raw honesty in his expression, the genuine pain in his eyes. "You're not damned," I said softly. "Damaged, yes. Dangerous, definitely. But not beyond saving. You don't know that. I know that genuinely evil people don't lose sleep over their actions. They don't help strangers. They don't feel shame." I took a breath. "I know that you could be better than you are. If you chose to be." "And if I chose to be better," he said carefully, "would you consider letting me help you? Not as charity. Not as guilt money. But as someone who cares about what happens to you and your children." It was a dangerous question. Accepting help from Antonio Russo meant entangling our lives, letting him into the carefully constructed walls I'd built around my small family. It meant owing something to a man whose business was violence and whose word could destroy lives. But it also meant Sophia would have her medications. Fred could have new shoes and school supplies. I could breathe a little easier, sleep a little better, maybe even start building a future instead of just surviving day to day. "What does that help look like?" I asked cautiously. "Practical things. I'll cover Sophia's medical expenses. I'll make sure you have reliable childcare, so you're not dependent on a 70-year-old neighbor. If your car breaks down or your apartment needs repairs, I'll take care of it. You focus on being a good mother. Let me handle the financial disasters. And in return? In return, you let me take you to dinner sometimes. As friends. You let me get to know Fred and Sophia if they're comfortable with that. You stop looking at me like I'm a monster waiting to devour you." I studied his face, searching for the trap, the hidden agenda, the real price I'd be paying. All I saw was a man who'd been broken young, built himself into something dangerous, and was now reaching toward something human. Toward connection. Toward maybe even healing. It was still a terrible idea. Teresa would tell me I was insane. Mr. Rossetti would probably have a heart attack. Any rational person would run from this situation as fast as possible. But I'd learned over the past 3 months that rational decisions didn't always lead to survival. Sometimes you had to take risks. Sometimes you had to accept help from unexpected sources. Sometimes you had to trust that not every hand offered in kindness was hiding a knife. Dinner, I said carefully. In public places. With clear boundaries. You don't meet my children until I decide I trust you completely. And the second you cross a line, the second you make me uncomfortable or try to control me, this arrangement ends. Fair enough. And I need to be clear about something else. I'm not Nancy. I'm not going to fall in love with you and try to change you into someone you're not. I'm not looking for romance or rescue. I'm just trying to keep my family afloat. Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe. Or relief. Understood. We shook hands across the table, sealing the deal, and I felt like I'd just made a pact with the devil. Or maybe I'd just accepted a life raft from the only person who'd thought to offer one. Time would tell which it was. Our first dinner happened 3 days later. He picked me up from my apartment in a car that probably cost more than I'd earn in 5 years. Driven by one of his men who nodded politely but didn't speak. Mrs. Bryan was watching the kids, and I'd carefully explained to Fred that I was having dinner with a friend from work. Fred had looked at me with those 2 old eyes and asked, "A boyfriend or a girlfriend?" "Just a friend," I'd said firmly. He hadn't looked convinced, but he'd nodded and kissed my cheek and told me to have fun. Antonio took me to a small Italian restaurant in a neighborhood I'd never been to. Not fancy like Rossetti's, but warm and intimate, with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles and the smell of fresh bread filling the air. This was my mother's favorite place, he told me as we sat down. She'd bring me here on my birthday every year. I save up for months to afford it. I bought it 10 years ago to keep it from closing. You own this restaurant? I own a lot of things. Most of them I bought because they were profitable. This one I bought because it mattered. The owner, an elderly woman with white hair and a warm smile, came over and hugged Antonio like he was family. Antonio! And who is this beautiful woman? This is Lucia. She's a friend. The woman, Rosa, beamed at me. Any friend of Antonio's is family here. I'll bring you the special, yes? And wine.
Good wine.
She bustled away before we could respond. She knew your mother? I asked. She was my mother's best friend. When my mother died, Rosa helped me with the funeral arrangements, made sure I finished school, tried to keep me on a good path. His smile was sad. Obviously, she didn't entirely succeed. You're not giving yourself enough credit. You're giving me too much. The food came, and it was incredible. Homemade pasta, rich sauce, fresh vegetables, bread that melted in your mouth. We ate and talked, and for the first time since I'd met him, Antonio Russo didn't feel dangerous. He felt human, broken and complicated, and trying his best with the tools he had. He told me about growing up poor, about watching his mother struggle, about the day he decided that poverty was a choice and he'd never make that choice again. He told me about the first time he'd hurt someone for money, how it had made him sick, how eventually he'd gone numb to it. I became the thing I hated, he said quietly. The powerful man who takes what he wants. And I told myself it was different because I was taking from other criminals, from people who deserved it. But power corrupts regardless of how you use it. I told him about David, about our dreams of buying a house someday, of giving Fred and Sophia a backyard and a dog and stability, about how those dreams had died with him, how I'd had to rebuild from scratch a version of life I'd never wanted. Do you still love him? Antonio asked. It was too personal a question for a first dinner, but I answered honestly. I'll always love him. He was kind and good, and everything I needed at that time in my life. But he's gone, and I have to figure out how to keep living without him. Do you want to meet someone new eventually? Remarry? I don't know. Maybe. If I found someone who accepted that my children come first. That I'm not whole anymore, just surviving. that I have baggage and trauma and days where I can barely function. I looked at him directly.
Why?
Are you offering? He smiled, and it was the first genuinely happy smile I'd seen from him.
No.
I meant what I said about not being capable of that. But I wanted to know if you were looking because if you are, I can set you up with better men than me. Men who have actual futures to offer. I don't want to be set up with anyone. I'm barely keeping my head above water as it is. Fair enough. We finished dinner, and he drove me home, walking me to my apartment door like a proper date. Except it wasn't a date. It was a complicated arrangement between two broken people trying to help each other survive. Thank you, I said at my door. For dinner. For being honest. For not pushing. Thank you for giving me a chance when you had every reason not to. He left, and I went inside to find Fred still awake, reading in bed. How is your friend? He asked carefully. Nice, I said. Just nice. Over the next 6 weeks, Antonio became a regular part of our lives in small ways. He'd stop by the restaurant on nights I worked and eat dinner in my section. We'd talk during slow moments, conversations that ranged from mundane things like favorite movies to deeper discussions about life and loss and how to build meaning from pain. He never tried to meet my children, true to his word. But he'd ask about them constantly. What Fred was learning in school. Whether Sophia's breathing was better.
If they needed anything.
And things would appear. A new bicycle for Fred that Mrs. Bryan said was delivered by mistake to her apartment. A specialized air purifier for Sophia's bedroom that Mr. Rossetti claimed was a bonus for good employees. Gift cards to the grocery store tucked into my paycheck envelope. Antonio never took credit, but I knew. I always knew. Teresa watched all of this with increasing alarm. You need to be careful, she warned me one night after closing. Men like Antonio Russo don't do anything without expecting something in return. And when they collect, it's never just money. He's not asking for anything.
Yet.
But he will. And when he does, you won't be able to say no because by then you'll owe him too much. Her words haunted me, but I pushed them aside. Because Sophia's asthma was under control. Because Fred had new shoes and was thriving in school. Because for the first time since David died, I could breathe without panic choking me. I was happy. Or, at least, I was surviving comfortably. And that felt like more than I deserved. Then came the night that changed everything. It was early December, 2 days before Sophia's 6th birthday. I was planning a small party, just Mrs. Bryan and maybe a few kids from Sophia's kindergarten class. Nothing fancy. Cake from the grocery store. Dollar store decorations. The kind of party you throw when you're grateful just to be able to throw one at all. Antonio asked about it during dinner one evening. What does she want for her birthday? She wants a dollhouse. One of those big wooden ones with furniture and lights. I found one online for $200, which is way more than I can afford, so she's getting a smaller one from the discount store. She'll love it anyway. She's a good kid. He nodded, filed the information away, and changed the subject. 2 days later, on Sophia's actual birthday, I got home from a morning shift at the restaurant to find a delivery truck outside my apartment building. 2 men were unloading the most beautiful dollhouse I'd ever seen. Victorian style, 3 stories, fully furnished, with working lights and miniature accessories that must have cost a fortune. Sophia saw it from our window and screamed with excitement. Fred looked at me with knowing eyes. Your friend, my friend, I confirmed, feeling my throat get tight. Antonio showed up an hour later with birthday cake from an actual bakery, fancy and decorated with pink roses and "Happy Birthday, Sophia" in perfect script. This was the moment I'd told him he couldn't have. Meeting my children.
Crossing that boundary.
But he was already here, and Sophia was staring at him with wide eyes, and Fred was hovering protectively near his sister. Hi, Antonio said, kneeling down to Sophia's level.
I'm Antonio.
I'm a friend of your mom's. I heard it was your birthday. Sophia, who is usually shy around strangers, surprised me by walking right up to him. Did you bring the dollhouse?
I did.
Do you like it? I love it. It's the best present ever. She threw her arms around his neck in a spontaneous hug that made Antonio freeze, his eyes going wide with something like panic and wonder. He carefully hugged her back, and when he pulled away, his expression was raw and unguarded. "Happy birthday, Sophia." Fred approached more cautiously. "That's a really expensive gift for someone you just met." "Fred," I said in warning. But Antonio smiled. "You're right. It is expensive. But your mom has become a very good friend, and I wanted to do something nice for your family. Is that okay with you?" Fred studied him with all the protective instinct of a 7-year-old who'd become the man of the house too young. "As long as you're not trying to replace our dad. Because nobody can do that." "I would never try," Antonio said seriously. "Your dad was important. He'll always be important. I'm just trying to help your mom and make sure you and your sister have what you need. That's all." Fred nodded slowly, accepting this. "Okay. But if you hurt my mom, I'll tell everyone at your restaurant that you're mean." Antonio's smile widened into something genuine. "That's fair. Deal." We spent the afternoon eating cake and watching Sophia play with her new dollhouse. Antonio sat on my worn couch, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit in my shabby apartment, but also somehow fitting perfectly into the moment. He was gentle with Sophia, patient with Fred's questions, and respectful of my boundaries. He didn't try to act like their father. He just existed in their space as a kind stranger who cared about their happiness. And watching him with my children, seeing the softness in his eyes when Sophia showed him each tiny piece of furniture in the dollhouse, hearing him laugh at Fred's jokes, I felt something shift in my chest. Something dangerous. Something that felt suspiciously like falling. The weeks after Sophia's birthday party blurred together in a way that should have alarmed me, but instead felt like relief. Antonio became a fixture in our lives, carefully and gradually, always respecting boundaries, but somehow always present. He'd pick Fred up from school sometimes when I had to work an early shift. He'd bring Sophia books about princesses and adventures. He'd sit at my kitchen table helping Fred with math homework while I made dinner, his massive frame hunched over second-grade worksheets with an intensity that would have been funny if it wasn't so endearing. Teresa's warnings echoed less and less as weeks turned into months. Because Antonio never asked for anything, never pushed, never made me feel like I owed him. But other people noticed. Mr. Rossetti pulled me aside one evening in January. "Lucia, I need to talk to you about Antonio Russo." My stomach dropped. "What about him?" "He's been spending a lot of time with you. A lot of money on you."
People are starting to talk.
"They're saying you're his mistress, that he set you up as his kept woman." Heat flooded my face. "That's not what's happening. We're just friends." "Are you?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've become very important to him, and that makes you a target." "A target for what?" Mr. Rossetti's expression was grim. "Antonio has enemies. Lots of them. Other families, business rivals, people who'd love to hurt him by hurting someone he cares about. If they think you matter to him, you're in danger. Your children are in danger." The words hit me like ice water. I'd been so focused on the kindness, the help, the way Antonio made us feel safe, that I hadn't considered the flip side. That his protection might actually be putting us at risk. What should I do? End it. Politely, carefully, but end it. Go back to being his waitress and nothing more. It's the only way to keep you and your children safe. I nodded, feeling sick, knowing he was right. That night, I tried to tell Antonio. He came by after work to drop off groceries, something he'd started doing weekly, always claiming the supermarket had a sale or he'd bought too much for himself. "Antonio, we need to talk." He set the bags on my counter, immediately serious. "What's wrong?"
"This. Us.
"Whatever this is, it needs to stop." His face went carefully blank.
"Why?"
"Because Mr. Rossetti says I'm becoming a target. That your enemies might come after me or my children to get to you. I can't risk that. I won't risk Fred and Sophia for anything." He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see calculations running behind his eyes. He's not wrong. Being associated with me does carry risks. then you understand why. But those risks exist whether you cut me off or not. People already know we're connected. Ending things now doesn't make you less of a target. It just makes you a target without protection. I hadn't considered that. So, what are you saying? I'm saying let me actually protect you. I'll assign security. Discreet, you won't even know they're there. Someone to watch your apartment building, someone to keep an eye on the kids' school. I'll make sure everyone in this city knows that hurting you or your children means declaring war on me. That's real protection, Lucia, not distance. It made horrible sense. But it also meant going deeper, becoming more entangled, making it harder to ever extract ourselves from his world. I don't want my children growing up surrounded by bodyguards. You won't see them. I promise. They'll be ghosts. But they'll be there if you need them. I looked at him standing in my tiny kitchen, this dangerous man who'd somehow become essential to our survival, and I knew I'd already made my choice. Maybe I'd made it the night I poured ice water on his head. Maybe I'd made it when I accepted his help for Sophia's medical bills. Or maybe I'd made it the moment he'd hugged my daughter on her birthday and looked at her like she was precious. Okay, I whispered. But if anything happens to my children because of you, it won't. I swear on my mother's grave, I will keep them safe. The security appeared the next day, invisible as promised. I never saw anyone, but Antonio assured me they were there. Watching. Protecting. Life continued. Winter melted into early spring. Fred turned 8. Sophia's asthma stayed controlled. I kept working at Rossetti's, kept accepting Antonio's help, kept telling myself we were just friends even as the way he looked at me changed into something deeper. Then in March, everything started unraveling. It started with small things. A man I didn't recognize watching me leave work one night. A car that seemed to follow my bus route home. Fred mentioning that a stranger had asked him questions at the playground about his mom's friend. I told Antonio about each incident. He assured me his security had everything under control, that these were just rival families testing his defenses, nothing to worry about.
But I worried anyway.
Then came the night Nancy showed up at my apartment. I was putting the kids to bed when someone knocked. I opened the door to find Antonio's ex-girlfriend standing there, makeup smeared, eyes red from crying, a half-empty wine bottle in her hand. "You're her," she slurred. "You're the waitress he replaced me with. Nancy, you should go home." I loved him. I gave him everything.
2 years of my life.
And he threw me away like garbage. For you. For a broke widow with 2 kids. Her words stung, but I kept my voice calm. Antonio and I are just friends. Whatever happened between you two has nothing to do with me. Liar. He never looked at me the way he looks at you. He never helped me the way he helps you. He never cared about me the way he obviously cares about you. She stepped closer, and I could smell the alcohol on her breath. What did you do? How did you trap him? I didn't trap anyone. Nancy, please leave. My children are sleeping. Your children. That's it, isn't it? He has some savior complex about you, and your poor dead husband, and your sick kid. You manipulated him, made him feel sorry for you. That's enough. Antonio's voice came from behind her, cold and dangerous. Nancy spun around, nearly losing her balance. Antonio. I just wanted to meet her. See what was so special. Go home, Nancy.
Now.
Don't come back here. Don't contact Lucia again. This is your only warning. Something in his tone must have penetrated the alcohol fog because Nancy paled, nodded, and stumbled away down the hallway. Antonio watched her go, then turned to me. Are you okay? How did you know she was here? Security called me the second she entered your building. I came as fast as I could. You have people watching inside my building? I have people making sure you're safe. That's what you agreed to. I agreed to discreet protection, not constant surveillance. It's the same thing. No, it's not. I stepped back into my apartment. This is too much, Antonio. Nancy's showing up drunk, your enemies following me, security in my building. This isn't the quiet, safe life I want for my children. Then what do you want me to do? Walk away? Leave you unprotected? I want you to tell me the truth. What's really happening? Why are your enemies suddenly so interested in me? He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. There's a power struggle. Another family trying to move into my territory. They're looking for weaknesses, ways to hurt me. And yes, they've identified you as someone I care about. Care about, I repeated. What does that mean, exactly? What do you think it means? I think it means I need to know what I am to you. Friend? Charity project? Something else? He stepped closer, and suddenly the space between us felt charged with all the things we'd been carefully not saying for months. You're not a charity project, he said quietly. You stopped being that the night you humiliated me in front of my men, and I realized I'd never met anyone like you. Someone strong enough to stand up to me. Brave enough to be vulnerable. Someone who made me want to be better than I am. Antonio. I'm falling in love with you, Lucia. Maybe I already have. And I know that's not what you want to hear. I know I'm the last person you should love back. But I needed you to know the truth. I needed you to understand why protecting you matters so much to me. The words hung in the air between us, impossible to take back, changing everything. My heart was racing. Part of me wanted to tell him I felt it too, that somewhere between the hospital bills and birthday cakes and homework help, I'd started seeing him not as the dangerous man who'd grab my wrist, but as the broken man trying so hard to be good. The man who treated my children like they mattered. The man who looked at me like I was worth protecting. But the rational part of my brain, the part that remembered David and grief, and how easily love could be torn away, screamed at me to run. I can't, I whispered. Antonio, I can't do this. I have to think about Fred and Sophia. They can't lose another person they care about. And your world is violent and dangerous, and I would never let anything happen to them. Or to you. You can't promise that. You're not invincible. And I can't watch my children fall in love with you only to lose you like they lost their father. Pain flashed across his face. So, what are you saying? I'm saying we need distance. Real distance. No more dinners, no more visits, no more playing house with my family. You can keep the security if it makes you feel better, but you can't be part of our lives anymore. Lucia.
Please.
Please just respect this boundary. For once, put what I need ahead of what you want. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him fighting himself, wanting to argue, wanting to push, wanting to make me see things his way. But finally he nodded. Okay, if that's what you need, I'll stay away. But the protection stays.
Non negociable. Fine.
He turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you're wrong. I think we could be good together. I think your children would be safe and happy. I think you deserve to be loved again, and I'd spend every day trying to deserve you. But I respect your choice. He left, and I closed the door and leaned against it, tears streaming down my face. Because he was right. I was terrified. Not of him. Of feeling something again. Of opening my heart to someone who could shatter it. Of letting my children love someone who might disappear. Grief had taught me that loving people meant risking devastation. And I decided, without realizing it, that the safest choice was to never risk it again. Antonio kept his word. He stayed away. I didn't see him at the restaurant. He stopped calling. The grocery delivery stopped. The small gifts for the kids stopped. It was like he'd erased himself from our lives completely. Except for the security. They were still there, invisible watchers I never saw, but somehow always felt. Fred noticed immediately. Where's Antonio? Did you guys fight? We didn't fight. He's just busy with work. You're lying. You have your lying voice. Kids saw too much. We needed some space. Sometimes adults need that. Did he do something bad? No, baby. He didn't do anything wrong. It's complicated. Fred looked at me with those two wise eyes and said, I think you're scared. He wasn't wrong. Sophia asked about Antonio constantly. When was he coming back? Could they call him? Did he forget about her dollhouse? Each question was a knife in my chest, proof that I'd let my children get attached to someone I should have kept at a distance from the start. Weeks passed. March became April. I told myself I'd made the right choice. That distance was safety. that we were better off without Antonio Russo's dangerous world touching our lives. Then everything fell apart. It started on a Tuesday evening. I was working a busy dinner shift when Mr. Rossetti pulled me aside, his face pale. "Lucia, you need to go home."
Now.
"What? Why?" "There's been an incident. Your apartment building. The police are there." My blood went cold. "My children. They're fine. They're with Mrs. Bryan. But you need to go. I'll call you a car." The drive home felt like it took hours instead of 15 minutes. When I arrived, police cars and fire trucks blocked the street. My apartment building was intact, but the one next to it was billowing smoke from several windows. I found Mrs. Bryan on the sidewalk with Fred and Sophia, both kids wrapped in blankets, their faces streaked with tears.
Nana.
Sophia ran to me, and I scooped her up, crushing her against me. "What happened? Are you okay?" "There was an explosion," Mrs. Bryan said, her voice shaking. "In the building next door. The blast blew out some of our windows. Everyone had to evacuate. The police said it might have been a gas leak, but..." "But what?" She looked at me with frightened eyes. "One of the officers asked me if anyone in our building had enemies. Lucia, I think someone was targeting your apartment. I think this was meant for you." The ground tilted beneath me.
No.
That's not possible. But even as I said it, I knew she was right. Antonio's enemies. The power struggle he'd mentioned. They'd found a way to hurt him, by hurting me. And they'd almost killed my children. A detective approached, asking questions I could barely process. Had I noticed anything suspicious? Did I have any enemies? Was I involved with anyone dangerous?
Elite.
Said no to everything. Because telling the truth meant explaining Antonio, and explaining Antonio meant admitting I'd knowingly put my children at risk. They let us go eventually. Said we couldn't return to the apartment until the building was inspected and deemed safe. Gave me a card for emergency housing assistance. I stood on that sidewalk with my 2 terrified children and 1 plastic bag of possessions Mrs. Bryan had managed to grab, and I had nowhere to go.
My phone rang.
"Antonio, are you okay? Where are you? How do you know?" My security called me. "Lucia, where are you?" "Outside my building. We can't go back inside." "I'm sending a car." "Don't argue. You and the kids are staying with me tonight." "Antonio, this is my fault. They were targeting you to hurt me. The absolute least I can do is make sure you're safe. Please, Lucia, let me help." I looked at Fred and Sophia, huddled together on the cold sidewalk, and I didn't have the strength to refuse. 20 minutes later, a car arrived and took us to an address in a neighborhood I'd only seen in magazines. Antonio's home was a penthouse that took up the entire top floor of a luxury building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Furniture that probably cost more than I'd earned in my entire life. Space that felt impossibly vast after our cramped apartment. Antonio met us at the door, and the relief on his face when he saw we were unharmed was devastating. "I'm so sorry," he said immediately. "This is my fault. I should have seen this coming. I should have protected you better." "You were protecting us," I said numbly. "Your security was there. They got everyone out. They should have prevented the explosion in the first place." Sophia was staring around the penthouse with wide eyes. Fred stood close to me, protective and wary. Antonio knelt down to their level.
"Hey.
I know this is scary, but you're safe here. I promise. No one can hurt you here." "Someone tried to hurt us?" Sophia whispered. I wanted to lie, to protect her innocence, but what was the point? She'd seen the explosion, felt the window shatter. She deserved the truth. "Yes, baby. But Antonio's going to make sure they can't try again." He showed us to a guest room that was bigger than our entire apartment had been. 2 beds, a bathroom with a tub big enough for Sophia to swim in, soft robes and towels, and everything we could possibly need. "I'll have my assistant bring clothes and supplies tomorrow. Tonight, just rest. If you need anything, I'm right down the hall." After I got the kids settled and finally asleep, I found Antonio on the balcony, staring out at the city lights, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Tell me the truth," I said. All of it. Who did this and why? He didn't look at me. A family called the Costas. They've been trying to move into my territory for months. Taking you out would have hurt me emotionally and shown weakness to everyone watching. 2 birds, 1 bomb. And now they've made a mistake. They went after civilians. Children. That's a line you don't cross. Not in this world. There are rules and they broke them. What are you going to do? He finally turned to face me, and his expression was cold in a way I'd never seen. This was the Antonio Russo other people feared. The one who built empires on violence. I'm going to destroy them.
Completely.
By the time I'm done, the Costas won't exist anymore. More violence. More death. When does it end? When people stop trying to hurt the things I care about. He set down his glass. I told you I wasn't capable of being a good man. I told you my world was dangerous. You didn't believe me or you didn't want to. But this is who I am, Lucia. This is what I do. I protect what's mine, and I annihilate threats. We're not yours. Aren't you? You've been eating food I bought, wearing clothes I paid for, sleeping safely because of security I provided. Your daughter's lungs work because of medicine I supply. Maybe you don't want to admit it, but you've been mine for months. The words should have made me angry. Instead, they just made me tired. So what now? We're trapped here? Under your protection indefinitely? Until I neutralize the threat, yes. A few days, maybe a week. Then you can go back to your life. What life? My apartment might be destroyed. Even if it's not, I can't go back there knowing someone tried to blow it up. I can't send my kids to school knowing they might be targets. You've destroyed any chance we had at normalcy. I'm trying to keep you alive. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be pulled into your world, to become something your enemies target. I just wanted to work and raise my children and survive. That's all I've ever wanted. And I gave you the means to do that. At what cost? My safety? My children's innocence? My ability to ever feel safe again? We stared at each other across the balcony. Both of us right, both of us wrong, both of us trapped in a situation neither of us knew how to escape. I'm sorry, he said finally. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. I'm sorry my world touched yours. I'm sorry for all of it. Sorry doesn't fix this. I know, but it's all I have right now. I left him on that balcony and went back to my children, crawling into the massive bed with both of them, holding them close, breathing in their familiar scent, grateful they were alive even as I mourned everything we'd lost. The next 3 days passed in a strange bubble. We were prisoners in luxury, unable to leave, constantly guarded, watching Antonio disappear for hours at a time to do things I didn't want to imagine. He'd come back with blood on his knuckles sometimes, bruises on his face, a hardness in his eyes that took hours to fade. But with Fred and Sophia, he was gentle, patient. He set up video games for Fred and played with Sophia's dollhouse. He ordered takeout from expensive restaurants and let them pick whatever they wanted. He made them laugh when they should have been terrified. And I watched him with my children, saw how natural he was with them, how much he genuinely cared, and I felt my resolve crumbling. On the 4th night, after the kids were asleep, he told me it was over. The Costa family has been handled. The threat is neutralized. You can go home tomorrow if you want. What does handled mean? It means they won't be bothering you again. It means you're safe. How many people died? He looked away. Does it matter? Yes.
3.
The ones who planned the bombing. The ones who gave the order. I made sure everyone knew what happens when you target innocents. The message has been received. 3 people dead because of me. Because Antonio cared about me. Because I'd let him into our lives. I think I'm going to be sick, I whispered. They would have killed you and your children without a second thought. They don't deserve your sympathy. Maybe not. But that doesn't mean I wanted them dead. Someone had to die, Lucia. Either them or you. I chose you. I'll always choose you. We went home the next day to find our apartment building was being evacuated permanently. Structural damage from the explosion. The building was condemned. We had 2 weeks to find new housing. I stood in our damaged apartment, looking at the blown-out windows and cracked walls, at Sophia's dollhouse covered in dust and Fred's school projects scattered across the floor, and I felt something inside me break. We'd lost everything. Again. Mrs. Bryan found me crying in the wreckage. "Lucia, what will you do?" "I don't know. I have some savings, but not enough for first and last month's rent anywhere decent. And who's going to rent to me with my credit score and employment history?" "You could ask Antonio."
No.
"I can't keep taking from him. I can't keep owing him. I need to do this on my own." But doing it on my own proved impossible. Every apartment I looked at was too expensive or wouldn't accept my application. The ones I could afford were in neighborhoods where I wouldn't feel safe with my children. The landlords who'd consider me wanted deposits I didn't have. We stayed in a cheap motel for a week, the four of us crammed into one room with stained carpet and thin walls and the constant sound of traffic outside. Fred started having nightmares. Sophia's asthma flared up from the poor air quality. I worked double shifts trying to save enough money while paying for the motel and meals and childcare. I was drowning all over again, and this time I'd done it to myself by pushing away the one person who could help. Teresa found me crying in the restaurant bathroom on my 10th day of living in that motel. "Call him," she said bluntly. "Stop being stubborn and call Antonio." "I can't."
Why not? Frida?
"Lucia, pride doesn't keep your children housed and fed. Pride doesn't make sure Sophia has clean air to breathe. Call him. He'll think I'm using him, coming back only because I need something." "So what if he does? Do you need help or not?" I needed help desperately. But the thought of calling Antonio, of admitting I couldn't do this alone, of accepting more charity from a man whose world had nearly killed us, felt like admitting defeat. I made it 2 more days before I broke. Sophia woke up unable to breathe one night, her inhaler doing nothing, and the motel was so far from the hospital that by the time the ambulance came, I was terrified she'd die in my arms. They stabilized her, kept her overnight for observation. And when they handed me the bill the next morning, I knew I was out of options. I called Antonio from the hospital cafeteria, my hand shaking. "Lucia? What's wrong?" "I need help," I whispered. "Sophia's in the hospital again. We're living in a motel. I can't find an apartment. I can't afford her medical bills. I can't do this alone anymore." "Where are you?" I told him. "Stay there. I'm coming." He arrived 30 minutes later, still wearing a suit like he'd left an important meeting to come to me. He found me in the cafeteria, took one look at my face, and pulled me into his arms. I fell apart. 3 months of grief and fear and exhaustion poured out in ugly sobs against his expensive shirt while he held me and told me it would be okay. "I'm sorry," I kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I pushed you away, and I was wrong, and I can't do this alone, and—"
Sure.
"It's okay. I've got you. I've got all of you. You're not alone anymore." He paid Sophia's hospital bills, found us a beautiful apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools, paid 6 months' rent in advance, hired a full-time nanny so I could work without worrying about childcare, set up trust funds for both children's educations. And I let him, because I was too broken and exhausted to fight anymore. But accepting his help this time felt different. It didn't feel like charity or friendship. It felt like surrender. Like I'd signed away my independence and my right to make my own choices. Antonio never said as much. He never demanded anything in return. But the dynamic had shifted. I owed him everything now. My children's safety, our home, our future. All of it built on his money and his protection. And slowly, I stopped being Lucia Reyes, widow and survivor, and started being Lucia Reyes, Antonio Russo's charity case. His project. His responsibility. I saw it in how Mr. Rossetti treated me at work. How other servers whispered when I passed. How customers looked at me with knowing eyes. Everyone knew I belonged to Antonio Russo now. Even if we weren't together romantically. Even if he'd never touch me again. I was his in every way that mattered. Fred understood it too. "Are we Antonio's family now?" he asked one night. "No, baby. We're still our own family." but he pays for everything. He takes care of us. Isn't that what family does? I didn't have an answer for that. Sophia, at least, was happy. Her asthma was controlled. She had her own bedroom with her beloved dollhouse. She went to a good school, where she was thriving. To her, Antonio was just the nice man who helped them. She didn't understand the complicated web of debt and obligation underneath. Summer came. I worked at the restaurant, came home to my beautiful apartment that I hadn't earned, helped my children with homework, and felt like a ghost in my own life. Antonio came by occasionally to check on us. Always polite, always respectful, never pushing for more than I was willing to give. But I could see it in his eyes. The want, the hope, the patience of a man who'd invested everything and was waiting for his return. And I knew, eventually, he'd stop being patient. Eventually, he'd want something back. And when that day came, I wouldn't be able to refuse him, because I owed him everything. The reckoning came on a humid August evening. Antonio showed up at my apartment unannounced, which he never did. His face was serious, his posture tense. "We need to talk." I let him in, my stomach knotting with dread. The kids were at a sleepover with friends from their new school, so we were alone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. But I need to know where we stand, Lucia. What this is between us. What you want it to be." I'd been dreading this conversation for months. "Antonio, I've given you space. I've given you time. I've given you everything you've asked for, and nothing you haven't. But I'm in love with you, and I need to know if there's any chance you'll ever feel the same way." The honest answer was complicated. Yes, I felt something for him. Yes, I'd started depending on him in ways that went beyond financial support. Yes, when he smiled at my children or looked at me with those dark eyes, I felt something warm and dangerous in my chest. But I was also terrified. Terrified of loving someone who could be taken away. Terrified of my children losing another father figure. Terrified of being swallowed completely by his dangerous world. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I care about you. I'm grateful for everything you've done. But I'm scared, Antonio. Of you, of your world, of what it would mean to actually be with you." What would it mean? It would mean my children grow up surrounded by violence. It would mean always wondering if today's the day someone comes after you and takes you away from us. It would mean accepting that the man I love might die young and violently, and I'd have to bury another person I care about. Or it would mean you have someone who loves you completely. Someone who'd die before letting anything happen to you or your children. Someone who'd give you everything you've ever wanted. What if what I want is normal? A partner who comes home from a regular job. Who doesn't have enemies trying to kill him. Who doesn't solve problems with violence. Then you want someone I can't be. He looked away. But here's the thing, Lucia. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep hovering around the edges of your life, hoping you'll let me in, knowing you see me as a threat instead of a partner. It's killing me. So, what are you saying? I'm saying you need to make a choice. Either give us a real chance, or let me go completely. No more financial support, no more visits, no more blurred lines. Clean break. You figure out your life without me, and I figure out mine without you. The ultimatum hit me like a physical blow. You'd cut us off? Stop helping? Even though Sophia needs. I'll make sure Sophia's medical needs are covered through a trust fund. She won't suffer. But everything else? The apartment, the nanny, the school tuition? That ends. Because I can't keep playing this game where I give everything and get nothing back. So this is about owing you? About me paying you back with a relationship?
No. God, no.
This is about me protecting myself. I'm in love with someone who can't love me back, and every day I help you. Every time I see you, it tears me apart a little more. I need to either move forward with you or move on completely. Those are my only options. I sat down on the couch, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. This was the moment I'd been dreading. The moment where Antonio's patience ended, and I had to decide what I was willing to risk. Can I have time to think about it? You've had months to think about it. What's going to change? He was right. I'd been avoiding this decision for as long as possible, hoping somehow it would resolve itself. But life didn't work that way. I thought about David, who I'd loved safely and completely. I thought about how his death had destroyed me, how I'd sworn never to risk that kind of pain again. But I also thought about the past 6 months. About Antonio helping Fred with homework. About him bringing Sophia her favorite books. About the way he looked at me like I was precious. About how safe I felt when he was near, despite knowing he was the most dangerous person in my life. And I thought about what kind of example I was setting for my children. Was I teaching them to hide from love because it might hurt? To choose safety over connection? To let fear make all their decisions?
I'm terrified, he whispered.
David died, and it broke me. I can't go through that again. Life doesn't come with guarantees, Lucia. I could die young. Or I could live to be 90. David could have lived to be 90, but he didn't. You can't control when people leave. You can only control whether you love them while they're here. He moved to sit next to me, close but not touching. I know I'm not what you imagine for yourself. I know my world is violent and dangerous. But I also know that I love you and your children more than I've ever loved anyone. And I'd spend every day trying to be worthy of you, trying to be better than I am, trying to give you the life you deserve. What if it's not enough? What if I can't get past the fear? Then I'll let you go.
Completely.
And I'll find a way to live with it. I looked at him, this complicated, dangerous, broken man who'd somehow become essential to my survival. And I realized that the fear wasn't really about him dying. It was about me living. Really living, not just surviving. Opening my heart again. Risking devastation for the chance at something beautiful. If I do this, I said slowly, if I give us a real chance, I need promises. Anything. You don't lie to me. Ever. About your business, about dangers, about anything. I need to know what I'm getting into. I promise. You keep my children safe above everything else. Including me. Including yourself. They're the priority. Always. And you try. You really try to be better than you are. To build something legitimate. To find a way out of the violence eventually. He hesitated on that one. I can't promise I'll succeed. This life doesn't let go easily. But you'll try. I'll try.
For you.
For Fred and Sophia. I'll try. I took a deep breath and made my choice. Okay, let's try. Let's see what happens when we stop being afraid and just let ourselves feel. The smile that broke across his face was beautiful, relieved and happy and younger than I'd ever seen him. He reached for my hand carefully, like I might change my mind. You won't regret this. I might, but I'll regret not trying even more. He kissed me then, soft and careful, and it felt like stepping off a cliff into free fall. Terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When Fred and Sophia came home the next day, Antonio was there making breakfast. The kids looked between us, clearly sensing something had changed. Are you and Mama together now? Fred asked bluntly. Antonio looked at me, letting me take the lead. Yes, I said. We're going to try being together. How do you feel about that? Sophia was immediately excited, already planning a wedding in her head. Fred was more cautious. Does this mean you're going to be our dad now? No, Antonio said firmly. I could never replace your dad. He was important and he'll always be important. But I'd like to be part of your family in a different way. As someone who loves your mom and cares about you both very much. Is that okay with you? Fred studied him for a long moment. You promise you won't leave us? The question gutted both of us. Antonio knelt down to Fred's level. I promise I'll do everything in my power to stay. I can't control everything, but I'll fight every day to be here for you and your sister and your mom. You have my word. Fred nodded slowly. Okay, but if you hurt my mom, I'm still telling everyone at your restaurant you're mean. Antonio laughed, pulling Fred into a hug. That's fair. And just like that, we became something new. Not quite a family yet, but the beginning of one. Complicated and messy and built on broken pieces, but trying. Growing. Healing together. 6 months later, December again. Sophia's 7th birthday. But this time, we weren't planning a party in a cramped apartment. We were planning a celebration in Antonio's penthouse, which had become our home 2 months ago when he'd asked me to move in, and I'd said yes. The past 6 months had been complicated. Learning to be in a real relationship, navigating Antonio's business and the dangers that came with it, helping Fred and Sophia adjust to a new father figure, building trust and boundaries and a life together. But it had also been beautiful. Watching Antonio come home each night and choose us over his business. Seeing him teach Fred to cook Italian food. Hearing Sophia call him Tonio and climb into his lap for bedtime stories. Falling asleep next to someone who loved me completely and waking up believing I deserved it. The party was in full swing, kids everywhere, Mrs. Bryan happy in a comfortable chair, when Antonio pulled me aside. "I need to tell you something. About my business." My stomach clenched. "What?" "I'm getting out. Selling my interests to a legitimate buyer, keeping only the legal restaurants and properties. I'm done with the violent parts. Done with the life that put you in danger." I stared at him. "When did you decide this?" "The day I realized I wanted more birthdays like this. More mornings waking up next to you. More nights helping with homework and reading stories. I can't have that life and keep doing what I've been doing. So I'm choosing the life. Can you just walk away? Is it that simple?" "Nothing's simple. But I've been building toward this for months. Making arrangements, paying off debts, setting up protections. By spring, I'll be completely legitimate. Just a restaurant owner and real estate investor. Boring and safe, and exactly what you asked for." Tears pricked my eyes. "You're really doing this? For us. For us. For me. For the man I want to be, instead of the man I was." He pulled me close. "You made me believe I could be better. So I'm being better." I kissed him there in the hallway, while our children's laughter echoed from the living room, and I felt something I hadn't felt since David died. Hope. Real, solid hope for the future. The party wound down. Kids left. Mrs. Bryan hugged us goodbye. Sophia fell asleep on the couch clutching her new presents. Fred helped Antonio clean up the kitchen, chattering about school and friends and ordinary beautiful things. Later, after both kids were in bed, Antonio found me on the balcony looking at the city lights. "Happy?" he asked. "Terrified?"
Happy.
"Grateful?" All of it at once. He wrapped his arms around me from behind. "I love you, Lucia Reyes. Thank you for taking a chance on a broken man. Thank you for proving me wrong about who you could be." We stood there together, watching the city, building a future one day at a time. 3 years later, Antonio's restaurants had expanded into a legitimate empire. Fred was thriving in middle school. Sophia's asthma was completely managed. We'd gotten married in a small ceremony with just family and close friends. And one evening, Antonio came home with papers in his hand and tears in his eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right." He showed me the papers. Adoption papers. For Fred and Sophia. "If it's okay with you. If they want me to. I'd like to officially be their father." We asked them that night at dinner. Fred cried and said yes immediately. Sophia launched herself at Antonio yelling, "Daddy," at the top of her lungs. And I watched this man who'd started as my nightmare become my children's father, and I understood that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes you have to risk everything to gain everything. Sometimes broken people can heal each other. And sometimes the person you fear most becomes the person you can't imagine living without. I hope you enjoyed this journey, wherever you're watching from. I hope it reminded you that strength comes in many forms, that healing is possible, and that love can grow in the most unlikely places. If this story touched you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories about survival and second chances, and leave a comment telling me about a time you took a risk that changed your life. Until next time, remember, you're stronger than you think, braver than you know, and worthy of love that sees all of you and chooses you anyway. This is Lucia Reyes, signing off.